The air in the Capitol building was thick with tension that morning, a palpable hum of anticipation threading through the marble corridors. It was one of those days where the usual buzz of legislative activity felt amplified, as if every whispered conversation and hurried footstep carried an extra layer of weight. Jasmine Crockett, the fiery Democratic representative from Texas, strode through the halls with her usual confidence, her heels clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that seemed to announce her presence before she even entered a room. She was a force, unapologetic, sharp-tongued, and known for her ability to cut through the noise with a blend of wit and conviction that had earned her both admirers and detractors. Today, though, something felt different. There was an edge to the atmosphere, a sense that the day's events were about to spiral into something unexpected. Across the city, Karoline Leavitt, the young and equally formidable White House press secretary, was preparing for her own mission. At just 27, she'd already made a name for herself as a fierce defender of the Trump administration, her articulate responses and unflinching demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos that often surrounded her boss's tenure. She was the youngest press secretary in history, a fact that her critics loved to wield against her, but one she wore like a badge of honor. Karoline had a knack for turning the tables on her opponents, her words precise and cutting, delivered with a calm that belied her age. Today, she decided to take her fight beyond the briefing room, straight into the lion's den of Capitol Hill. Her target? Jasmine Crockett. The two women couldn't have been more different. Jasmine was a seasoned lawyer turned politician, a black woman from Texas who'd built her career on advocating for the marginalized, her rhetoric often laced with the kind of raw emotion that resonated deeply with her base. Karoline, on the other hand, was a product of the conservative machine, a New Hampshire native who'd risen through the ranks of Trump's orbit with a steely determination and a wardrobe that screamed traditionalism. Boxy blazers and boucle skirts that stood in sharp contrast to the flashier styles of her predecessors. Where Jasmine thrived on passion, Karoline leaned on precision. Where Jasmine spoke from the heart, Karoline calculated every syllable. And yet, on this April morning in 2025, their paths were about to collide in a way neither could have fully anticipated. It started with a press gaggle outside a committee room. Jasmine had just finished a heated session on the House Judiciary Subcommittee, where she'd been grilling witnesses about what she called the unchecked corruption in federal agencies under the current administration. Her voice had carried through the room, sharp and unrelenting, as she pressed her points with a kind of fervor that made her a standout among her peers. She'd been particularly vocal about the influence of Elon Musk, a figure she'd criticized repeatedly for what she saw as his outsized role in shaping government policy. "The rest of us don't get federal contracts handed to us on a silver platter," she'd said earlier that week, her words dripping with disdain. "We don't get the feds protecting our businesses while the little guy gets crushed." It was a line that had sparked applause from her supporters and outrage from the right, and it was still echoing in the air as she stepped out into the hallway. That's when Karoline appeared. She'd been waiting, flanked by a small entourage of aides and a handful of reporters who'd caught wind that something was brewing. The press secretary had her arms crossed, her expression cool but her eyes locked on Jasmine with an intensity that suggested she'd come prepared for a fight. The reporters parted slightly as she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Representative Crockett," she began, her tone measured but firm, "I think it's time we had a conversation about your rhetoric." Jasmine stopped short, her head tilting slightly as she sized up the younger woman. She'd seen Karoline on TV, of course. Those briefings were hard to miss, but this was different. This was personal, face-to-face, no podium or microphone to buffer the exchange. "My rhetoric?" Jasmine replied, her voice carrying that signature mix of incredulity and defiance. "Honey, I'm just speaking the truth. If you've got a problem with that, maybe you should take it up with the folks who keep handing your boss's buddies the keys to the kingdom." The hallway seemed to shrink as the two women squared off, the reporters scribbling furiously, phones raised to capture every word. Caroline didn't flinch. "The truth?" she shot back. "You've been throwing around accusations about Elon Musk and this administration like they're facts, when all you've got is conjecture and a loud voice. You're inciting division, and you know it." Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Division? Oh, please. Don't come at me with that. Your people have been dividing this country since day one, pitting folks against each other while the rich get richer and the rest of us scramble for crumbs. I'm not the one out here playing defense for billionaires." The exchange was electric, each word a spark that threatened to ignite something bigger. Caroline took a step closer, her voice dropping slightly but losing none of its edge. "You want to talk about playing defense? Let's talk about your little stunt with the Tesla takedown call. Telling people to sell their stock, dump their cars. Sounds like you're the one trying to tank a company because you don't like the guy running it. That's not truth, that's a tantrum. That hit a nerve." Jasmine's composure slipped for a moment, her hands planting on her hips as she leaned in, her voice rising. "A tantrum? You think I'm out here throwing a fit? I'm calling out a system that's rigged, and you're mad because I'm not polite about it. Tesla's not the victim here. Neither is Musk. The victims are the people who can't catch a break because your administration keeps propping up the same old power players."
The reporters were eating it up, their questions starting to bubble up, but neither woman paid them any mind. This was between them now, a clash of wills that had been building for weeks, maybe months. Caroline's jaw tightened, but she kept her cool, her response as sharp as a blade. "You're so busy pointing fingers, you don't even see the hypocrisy. You claim to fight for the little guy, but you're out here attacking Hobbes, American Hobbes, because you've got a personal vendetta. That's not justice, that's spite." Jasmine laughed, a short, incredulous sound that echoed off the walls. "Spite? Oh, you're good. You're real good. Twist it however you want, but I'm not the one standing here defending a billionaire who's got the government in his pocket. You're out of your depth, sweetheart. Go back to your briefing room and leave the real work to the grown-ups." That was the moment it snapped. Caroline's eyes flashed, and for the first time, a hint of real anger broke through her polished exterior. "Out of my depth? I'm not the one losing it over a few hard truths. You can't handle being called out, so you lash out. That's your playbook, yell loud enough, and maybe no one notices you don't have the answers." Jasmine's face hardened, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You don't know me, little girl. You don't know what I've been through or what I'm fighting for. You want to come at me? Fine. But don't think for a second I'm gonna back down because you've got a fancy title and a microphone." The standoff stretched on for a bit, the air between them crackling with unspoken challenges. The reporters were practically holding their breath, sensing they were witnessing something raw, unscripted, and rare. Then, abruptly, Jasmine turned on her heel, her parting shot thrown over her shoulder. "I've got work to do. You should try it sometime." Caroline didn't move, watching as Jasmine disappeared around the corner, her adrenaline behind her like a small army. The press secretary exhaled slowly, her composure sliding back into place as she turned to face the reporters. "Any questions?" she asked, her tone clipped but steady. The questions came fast, about Musk, about Tesla, about the confrontation itself, but Caroline handled them with her usual deftness, deflecting and redirecting with a skill that belied the intensity of what had just happened. Back in her office later, Schide replied the moment in her mind, wondering if Schide pushed too far or not far enough. Schide wanted to rattle Jasmine, to expose the cracks in her fiery facade, and Schide succeeded, at least for a moment. But she knew this wasn't the end. Jasmine Crockett wasn't the type to let a challenge go unanswered. Meanwhile, Jasmine stormed into her office, slamming the door behind her with enough force to make the framed photos on the wall tremble. She paced the room, her mind racing, her heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and frustration. Who does she think she is? She muttered to herself, her hands clenching into fists. She faced down plenty of opponents in her team, lawyers, politicians, pundits, but there was something about Karoline's calm, calculated attack that had gotten under her skin. It wasn't just the words, it was the audacity, the way the younger woman had marched into her territory and thrown down the gauntlet. She sank into her chair, staring at the ceiling as she tried to steady her breathing. She knew she'd lost her cool out there, just for a second, and that stung more than anything Caroline had said. Jasmine prided herself on her control, her ability to keep her head when everyone else was losing theirs. But that confrontation had shaken her, and she hated that it showed. She could already imagine the headlines, Crockett loses it, and the inevitable spin from the right-wing media machine. They depaint her as unhinged, emotional, everything she'd spent her career proving she wasn't. Her eye, Marcus, poked his head in, his expression cautious. "You okay, boss?" he asked, hovering in the doorway. Jasmine waved him off, forcing a smile that didn't take it to reach her eyes. "I'm fine. Just needed a minute. That little press secretary thought she could come in here and school me. She's got another thing coming." Marcus nodded, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "She's young, but she's sharp. You see how she played that? Cool as ice. People are gonna eat it up." "Yeah, well, let em," Jasmine said, leaning back in her chair. "She wants a fight, she's got one. I don't back down from anybody, especially not some kid who thinks she can waltz in here and tell me how to do my job." Marcus hesitated, then ventured, "You sure you want to escalate this? She's got the White House behind her. That's a lot of firepower." Jasmine's eyes glinted with determination. "And I've got the people behind me. She can bring all the firepower she wants. I'm not blinking first." Across town, Caroline was back at the White House, briefing her team on the encounter. She kept her tone even, her words clipped and professional, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She began toe-to-toe with Jasmine Crockett and come out standing, and that felt like a win, even if it was just the opening salvo. Her ads were already fielding calls from reporters, the story spreading like wildfire across social media and cable news. "Crockett crumbles," one headline read. "Leavitt lands a punch," said another.
She didn't let it go to her head. Caroline knew better than to underestimate Jasmine. The woman was a fighter, and this was far from over. But for now, she'd drawn first blood, and that was enough to keep her focused. She'd come to Washington to defend her administration, to push back against the critics who'd written them off, and today had been a step in that direction. Jasmine might have lost it out there, just for a moment, but Caroline had kept her footing. And in this game, that mattered. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and calls, both women moving through their routines with the confrontation still simmering in the back of their minds. For Jasmine, it was fuel, another reason to keep pushing, to keep speaking out, to prove she wouldn't be silenced or shaken. For Caroline, it was validation, a sign that she could hold her own against the loudest voices in the room, that her youth and inexperience didn't define her. By evening, the story had taken on a life of its own. Pundits dissected every word, every gesture, spinning it to fit their narratives. On Fox, They praised Karoline's poise and slammed Jasmine's meltdown. On MSNBC, they hailed Jasmine's passion and called Karoline a Trump puppet. Twitter, or X, as it was still called, was a battlefield, with hashtags like #Crockett vs. Leavitt trending alongside memes and hot takes from every corner of the political spectrum. Jasmine scrolled through it all from her apartment that night, a glass of wine in hand, her expression a mix of exhaustion and resolve. She knew she'd stumbled out there, let her temper flare when she should have stayed cool. But she also knew she'd get another shot. This wasn't a one-off, it was the start of something bigger, a rivalry that would play out in public and private, on camera and off. She'd be ready next time. Karoline, meanwhile, sat in her small office at the White House, the lights dim as she reviewed her notes from the day. She didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. She just worked, her mind already turning to the next move. Jasmine Crockett was a challenge, but Karoline thrived on challenges. She'd faced her down once, and she'd do it again if she had to. This was Washington, after all. Nothing came easy, and no one backed down without a fight. The city settled into night, the Capitol's dome glowing against the dark sky, a silent witness to the day's drama. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new headlines. But for now, the clash between Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt lingered in the air, a moment of raw, unfiltered confrontation that had left its mark on both of them. Neither had won, not really, but neither had lost, either. And in a town built on power and perception, that was enough to keep the story alive, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Jasmine sat still in her apartment, the wine glass now resting on the coffee table, its contents barely touched. The faint hum of the city filtered through her window, a distant reminder of the world still turning outside her walls. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, her fingers steepled as she stared at the phone screen, the endless scroll of opinions and outrage. Every tweet, every post, seemed to pull at her, demanding a response, but she held back. She'd learned long ago that silence could be a weapon, too. Let them talk, let them speculate. The fire in her chest hadn't dimmed, though. It burned steady, fueled by the memory of Karoline's cool stare and cutting words. Across town, Karoline's office remained a small island of light in the sprawling White House complex. The notes spread across her desk were meticulous, each line a testament to her methodical approach. She tapped her pen against the paper, a rhythmic tick that betrayed the calm she projected. The confrontation replayed in her mind. Not the words themselves, but the way Jasmine's face had shifted, that flicker of vulnerability before the mask snapped back into place. It was a crack, however small, and Karoline filed it away, a piece of the puzzle she'd use when the time was right. Back in the apartment, Jasmine's thoughts drifted to her team. Marcus had been right. Karoline was sharp, sharper than she'd expected. The press secretary's youth had lulled her into underestimating her, a mistake she wouldn't make again. She could still hear the echo of her own voice in that hallway, the way it had risen, too loud, too fast. It wasn't the first time her passion had spilled over, but it was the first time in a while she'd felt it used against her so effectively. She clenched her jaw, resolving to turn that misstep into strength. Karoline, meanwhile, glanced at the clock on her wall. Barely past 9, but it felt later. The weight of the day pressed against her shoulders, not heavy enough to slow her down, but enough to make her aware of it. She'd faced bigger storms than this, weathered tougher critics, but there was something about Jasmine's energy that stuck with her. It wasn't just the volume or the venom, it was the conviction behind it, the kind of belief that didn't bend. She respected it, even if she'd never admit it out loud. Jasmine stood, pacing the small living room, her bare feet silent against the hardwood. The wine sat forgotten as she moved, her mind too restless to settle. She stopped by the window, looking out at the city lights, their glow a stark contrast to the dark knot of frustration inside her. She'd built her career on standing up, on speaking out, and she'd be damned if some press secretary, however clever, made her question that. Caroline might have landed a hit, but Jasmine knew how to take a punch and keep swinging. In her office, Caroline set the pen down, leaning back in her chair. The silence was a rare luxury, one she savored as she let her thoughts drift. She could still see the reporters' faces, the way their eyes had widened as the exchange escalated. It was a moment they'd chase, a story they'd milk for days, and she'd given them exactly what they wanted. But it wasn't about them. It was about Jasmine, about proving she could stand her ground against one of the loudest voices in Congress. She'd done that, and it felt solid, real. Jasmine's gaze lingered on the Capitol in the distance, its dome a beacon against the night. She thought about the people she represented, the ones who'd sent her here to fight for them. That was her anchor, her North Star, and no amount of polished rhetoric from Caroline Leavitt could shake it. She turned away from the window, her resolve hardening. She'd lost her temper today, yes, but she hadn't lost herself. That was what mattered. Caroline reached for her phone, skimming the latest updates on X. The hashtags were still trending, the memes multiplying, but she didn't linger on them. She'd seen enough to know the narrative was splitting. Half the internet crowned her the victor, the other half rallied behind Jasmine. It was predictable, almost comforting in its chaos. She set the phone down, her mind already shifting to the next day's briefing, the next chance to shape the story. Jasmine crossed to her desk, pulling out a notepad and a pen. She scribbled a few lines, ideas, not a speech, her handwriting sharp and jagged. She needed to channel this, to turn the heat of the moment into something concrete. Caroline had come at her with precision, and she'd meet that with power, the kind that didn't just shout but struck. She paused, tapping the pen against the page, a mirror of Caroline's earlier habit. In the White House, Caroline's eyes drifted to a framed photo on her desk, her family, smiling at some long-ago event. It grounded her, a reminder of why she'd taken this job, why she kept pushing through the noise. Jasmine's words about billionaires and rigged systems echoed faintly, but she brushed them aside. She didn't see the world that way, didn't buy the narrative of victims and villains. To her, it was about results, and she'd deliver them, one press conference at a time. Jasmine's notepad filled slowly, each word a brick in the wall she was rebuilding around herself. She wrote about the people she'd met back in Texas, the stories that had driven her to this point. Caroline could talk all she wanted about jobs and spite, but Jasmine knew the stakes were bigger than that. She'd felt them, lived them, and she'd make sure her voice carried them forward, no matter who tried to drown it out. Caroline stood, stretching slightly as she crossed to the window. The view wasn't as grand as Jasmine's, just a sliver of the South Lawn, but it was enough. She thought about the hallway, the way Jasmine had turned away at the end, that final barb thrown like a gauntlet. It wasn't retreat, she knew that much. It was a promise, a signal that this was only the beginning. She welcomed it, in her quiet way. Jasmine set the pen down, her hand aching faintly from the grip. She leaned back, exhaling a long, slow breath. The anger was still there, simmering, but it had focus now, direction. She could see Caroline's face in her mind, that infuriating calm, and it pushed her to keep going. She'd show them all, that she wasn't just noise, but substance, too. Caroline returned to her desk, flipping through her notes one last time. She circled a phrase she'd used earlier, hard truths, and underlined it twice. It felt right, a distillation of what she'd aimed for in that confrontation. Jasmine could call it whatever she wanted, spite, tantrum, but Caroline knew it was more than that. It was a line in the sand, and she'd hold it. Jasmine glanced at the clock, nearly 10 now, and felt the weight of the day settle fully. She wasn't tired, not really, just wired, her mind still racing. She thought about calling Marcus, running some of her ideas by him, but decided against it. This was hers to wrestle with for now, a battle she'd fight in her own head before taking it back to the world. Caroline shut her notebook, the sound crisp in the quiet room. She'd done what she could tonight, laid the groundwork for whatever came next. Jasmine's parting shot lingered, leave the real work to the grown-ups, and it stung more than she'd expected. Not because it was true, but because it was so far from it. She'd prove that, too, in time. Jasmine stood again, restless, and moved to the kitchen. She poured a glass of water, the coolness a contrast to the heat still coursing through her. She sipped it slowly, staring at nothing, her thoughts a tangle of strategy and memory. Caroline had gotten under her skin, but she'd get under hers, too. It was a game now, and Jasmine played to win. Caroline turned off the desk lamp, the room plunging into shadow. She grabbed her coat, ready to head home, but paused at the door. The day's events hung around her like a second skin, impossible to shake. She'd faced Jasmine Crockett and held her own, and that was enough for tonight. Tomorrow, she'd be ready for more. Jasmine finished the water, setting the glass down with a soft clink. She returned to the living room, her eyes catching on the notepad again. She smiled faintly, a flicker of something fierce and determined. Caroline Leavitt might have started this, but Jasmine Crockett would finish it. The night stretched on, the city quiet but alive, and in their separate corners, both women stood poised, waiting for the next move. The notepad seemed to call to her, its scribbled lines a map of her thoughts. Jasmine crossed back to it, picking up the pen once more. She hovered over the page, her mind buzzing with the day's echoes. Caroline's voice, the reporter's stares, the weight of her own words. She wrote another line, slower this time, deliberate. They think they can silence me, but I've got a megaphone they can't unplug. It felt good, solid, a reminder of her own power. In her office, Caroline lingered by the door, her hand resting on the knob. The darkened room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in with the weight of what she'd set in motion. She glanced back at her desk, the closed notebook a silent testament to her discipline. She didn't need to open it again. She knew what was there, knew the plan she'd laid out. Jasmine's fire was a challenge, but Caroline's strength was her steadiness. Jasmine's pen scratched against the paper, the sound a quiet counterpoint to the city's hum. She thought about her constituents, the faces she'd seen at town halls and rallies, people who'd trusted her to be their voice. Caroline could spin her words however she liked, but Jasmine knew who she was fighting for. That knowledge anchored her, kept her from spiraling into the frustration that still simmered beneath her skin. Caroline stepped back into the room, her coat still draped over her arm. She wasn't ready to leave, not yet. The confrontation had left a residue, a restlessness she couldn't shake. She moved to the window again, staring out at the sliver of lawn, the faint glow of security lights. Jasmine's parting shot replayed in her head, "Go back to your briefing room," and she clenched her teeth, resisting the urge to let it burrow deeper. Jasmine paused, her pen hovering mid-sentence. She could still see Caroline's face, that infuriating calm, the way she'd stood there like she owned the hallway. It wasn't just the words that stung, it was the confidence, the way the younger woman had met her blow for blow. Jasmine respected a good fight, But this one felt personal, a test of more than just politics. She pressed the pen down again, writing faster. Karoline's fingers tightened around the coat, the fabric bunching in her grip. She forced herself to relax, to breathe. She'd faced down tougher opponents, seasoned journalists, hostile senators, but Jasmine was different. There was a rawness to her, a force that didn't play by the usual rules. Karoline thrived on structure, on control, and Jasmine threatened that in a way she hadn't anticipated. Jasmine's notepad was nearly full now, the pages a chaotic sprawl of ideas and anger. She flipped to a new one, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. She wrote about Musk again, about the systems she saw as broken, about the people who paid the price. Karoline could call it conjecture, but Jasmine called it reality. She'd lived it, seen it, and she'd keep shouting it until someone listened. Karoline turned from the window, her reflection a faint ghost in the glass. She crossed back to her desk, dropping the coat over the chair. She didn't sit, just stood there, her hands resting on the wood. The day had been a win, she told herself, small, but real. She'd rattled Jasmine, made her flinch, and that was something. But the victory felt incomplete, shadowed by the knowledge that Jasmine wouldn't stay rattled for long. Jasmine leaned back, stretching her arms above her head. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, the act of writing bleeding off some of the day's heat. She glanced at the clock again, still shy of 10:30, and felt a flicker of satisfaction. She'd turned the clash into fuel, something she could use. Karoline might have caught her off guard, but Jasmine was already rebuilding, stronger than before. Karoline's eyes fell on the photo again, her family's smiles a quiet anchor. She traced the frame with her fingertip, grounding herself in the moment. Jasmine's accusations about billionaires, about power, didn't faze her because she didn't see the world through that lens. She believed in the administration she served, in the results they chased. Jasmine could yell all she wanted. Karoline would keep proving her wrong with facts. Jasmine stood, leaving the notepad open on the table. She moved to the couch, sinking into it with a sigh. The city lights flickered through the window, a distant dance she barely noticed. She replayed the hallway scene again, dissecting it, searching for where she'd slipped. It wasn't the volume, she decided, it was the timing. She'd let Karoline dictate the rhythm, and that wouldn't happen twice. Karoline picked up her phone, thumbing through the latest posts on X. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of praise and criticism that blurred together. She didn't linger, didn't let it pull her in. She'd done her job today, held her ground, and that was enough. Jasmine's fire might burn bright, but Karoline's was a slow, steady flame, one that didn't flicker under pressure. Jasmine closed her eyes, letting the couch cradle her. The anger was still there, a low hum, but it was tempered now, shaped into something she could wield. She pictured Karoline's face again, that cool mask, and felt a surge of determination. The press secretary might think she'd won a round, but Jasmine knew this was a marathon, not a sprint. She'd outlast her. Karoline set the phone down, her movements deliberate. She glanced at the notebook one last time, satisfied with what she'd left there. The day had tested her, pushed her, but she'd come through it intact. Jasmine's passion was formidable, but Karoline's precision was her own kind of weapon. She'd use it again, when the moment called for it. Jasmine opened her eyes, staring at the ceiling. The notepad loomed in her peripheral vision, a promise to herself. She wouldn't just respond to Karoline. She'd redefine the fight, set the terms. The younger woman had come at her with calculation, but Jasmine had heart, and that was something no briefing room script could match. Caroline grabbed her coat again, slinging it over her shoulder. She flicked off the office light, the room plunging into darkness. The hallway stretched ahead, quiet and empty, a stark contrast to the chaos of earlier. She walked slowly, her steps measured, her mind still turning over the confrontation. Jasmine was a force, but so was she. Jasmine sat up, reaching for the notepad once more. She flipped back to the first page, reading over her initial scrawl. It was rough, unpolished, but it was hers, her voice, her fight. Caroline could try to box her in, but Jasmine would break out every time. She smiled again, sharper this time, ready for whatever came next. Caroline reached the White House exit, the cool night air hitting her as she stepped outside. She paused, glancing up at the sky. No stars, just the city's glow. The day's weight lingered, but she carried it easily. Jasmine Crockett was a challenge, but Caroline Leavitt was built for challenges. She'd meet her again, and she'd be ready. Jasmine set the notepad down, her hands resting in her lap. The apartment was still, the city a soft murmur beyond the walls. She felt the fire in her chest settle into a steady burn, a promise to herself and everyone watching. Caroline might have started this, but Jasmine would finish it, her way, on her terms, with every ounce of strength she had. The night held them both, two women poised on the edge, their clash a spark still smoldering in the dark. She leaned back against the couch, her fingers tracing the edge of the cushion absent-mindedly. The quiet was a rare gift, a chance to think without the clamor of the hill or the buzz of her phone. Jasmine's mind circled back to Caroline's stance in that hallway, arms crossed, voice steady, eyes unyielding. It wasn't just the words that lingered. It was the way the younger woman had carried herself, like she belonged there, challenging her. Jasmine's lips pressed into a thin line, her resolve sharpening. Outside the White House, Caroline stood still, the night air cool against her skin. She adjusted the coat over her shoulder, her gaze lingering on the sky's muted glow. The confrontation replayed in fragments. Jasmine's raised voice, the reporter's eager scribbles, the electric tension that had filled the space. She'd held her own, kept her footing, but there was a part of her that wondered what Jasmine was doing now, how she was processing it. Caroline exhaled, her breath visible in the dim light. Jasmine's hands stilled, her eyes drifting to the notepad again. She didn't pick it up this time, just let it sit there, a silent partner in her thoughts. She could still hear her own words, leave the real work to the grown-ups, and winced slightly. It had been a jab, a reflex, but it hadn't landed the way she'd wanted. Caroline hadn't flinched, hadn't risen to the bait. That stuck with her, a reminder to aim higher next time. Caroline shifted her weight, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. The White House loomed behind her, its silhouette a constant in her world. She thought about Jasmine's fire, the way it had flared in that moment of lost control. It was a weakness, sure, but it was also a strength, unpredictable, untamed. Caroline respected that, even as she planned to exploit it. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her mind still working. Jasmine crossed her arms, mirroring Caroline's earlier pose without realizing it. The apartment felt too small suddenly, the walls too close. She stood, moving to the window again, needing the expanse of the city to match the sprawl of her thoughts. Caroline's accusation, "You're inciting division," echoed faintly, and Jasmine shook her head. Division was already there. She was just naming it, giving it a voice. She wouldn't apologize for that. Caroline glanced back at the White House, its lights a faint glow through the windows. She could go back inside, lose herself in more work, but she stayed put, rooted by the day's weight. Jasmine's laughter in that hallway, short, sharp, incredulous, rang in her ears. It had been a weapon, a dismissal, and it had landed harder than Caroline cared to admit. She straightened, pushing the thought aside, focusing on her next step. Jasmine pressed her forehead against the cool glass, the sensation grounding her. She thought about her team again, about Marcus's cautious warning. He'd seen the risk in escalating this, but Jasmine saw the necessity. Caroline wasn't just a press secretary. She was a symbol of everything Jasmine fought against, a polished front for a system she despised. She pulled back, her reflection staring back at her, fierce and unyielding. Caroline's hand tightened on her coat, the fabric a tether to the present. She replayed her own words, "You can't handle being called out," and felt a flicker of satisfaction. It had hit, she knew it had, even if Jasmine had covered it with that final turn and walk away. Caroline thrived on those moments, the small victories that built into something bigger. She'd keep pushing, keep finding the cracks. Jasmine turned from the window, her steps slow as she returned to the couch. She sat again, her posture less tense now, more deliberate. The notepad caught her eye once more, its pages a testament to her refusal to back down. She thought about her next move, not just a retort, but a strategy, something that would shift the ground beneath Caroline's feet. She'd find it, she always did. Caroline took a step forward, then stopped, her gaze dropping to the ground. The pavement gleamed faintly under the streetlights, a mirror to her own clarity. She'd gone into that hallway with a plan, and it had worked, mostly. Jasmine's fire had burned hotter than expected, but Caroline had kept her cool, and that was her edge. She lifted her head, her resolve as firm as ever. Jasmine reached for the water glass again, rolling it between her palms. The coolness steadied her, a counterpoint to the heat still simmering inside. She pictured Caroline's face, that calm mask, and felt a surge of defiance. The press secretary might think she'd scored a point, but Jasmine knew how to play the long game. She'd turn this into something bigger, something undeniable. Caroline adjusted her coat, pulling it tighter against the night's chill. She thought about the reporters, the way they'd hung on every word, and knew the story was still unfolding. Jasmine's outburst would dominate the headlines, but Caroline's restraint would linger in the subtext. She'd made her mark, subtle but sharp, and that was enough for now. Jasmine set the glass down, her hands folding in her lap. She closed her eyes again, letting the quiet wash over her. The day had been a storm, but she'd weathered it, turned it into something she could use. Caroline's precision was impressive, but Jasmine's passion was her own kind of power, one that didn't bend, didn't break. She'd wield it like a blade next time. Caroline glanced at her watch, the faint glow of the numbers a reminder of the hour. She didn't move though, still caught in the moment's pull. Jasmine's energy was a force she couldn't ignore, a challenge she couldn't dismiss. It pushed her, sharpened her, and she welcomed it in her quiet way. She'd be ready for the next round, whenever it came. Jasmine opened her eyes, her gaze steady now, focused. The notepad sat there, a promise she'd keep. She thought about her words in that hallway, the way they'd spilled out, and vowed to refine them, to make them hit harder. Caroline might have started this with her calculated jab, but Jasmine would end it with a roar they'd all hear. Caroline took a deep breath, the night air filling her lungs. She turned back toward the White House, then stopped again, her silhouette a still figure against the glow. The confrontation had left its mark, a subtle shift in her stance. Jasmine was a fighter, but so was she, different weapons, same war. She'd meet her again, and she'd stand tall. Jasmine leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her mind racing but clear. She could still feel the heat of that moment, the way it had surged through her, but it was hers now, controlled, directed. Karoline's coolness was a challenge, but Jasmine's fire was her answer. She'd burn brighter, louder, until no one could look away. Karoline's hand brushed her phone in her pocket, but she didn't pull it out. The world could wait. She needed this pause, this space to think. Jasmine's presence lingered, a shadow she couldn't shake, but Karoline didn't fear it. She'd faced it once, held her ground, and she'd do it again. Her strength was her stillness, and it wouldn't waver. Jasmine stood, stretching, her body loosening as her mind sharpened. She glanced at the notepad one last time, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The night was hers now, a canvas for her next move. Karoline Leavitt might have sparked this, but Jasmine Crockett would finish it, bold, unapologetic, and unstoppable. The city hummed on, the spark between them still alive, waiting to flare again.